Good morning, folks. The real Captain Kirk here, live from Weather Trends 360 studio here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It is Monday morning, the 29th of July. Thought we'd do a real quick recap of July since most of the month is in the book. So this is mostly history and a couple days of forecast here, but the trends will probably hold up just fine. World scale, the United States was the coolest in 4 years, still ninth warmest in 30 years, so by no means really cold, but again, coolest in 4 years, so a downward trend. Drier than last year and 12th wettest in 30. Heading up to Canada, coolest in 8 years, again, still 14th warmest, so kind of in the middle of the pack. Wettest in 3 years and 13th driest in 30 years. Europe overall made some headlines, cooler than last year. For Europe as a whole was the 12th warmest in 30 years, wetter than last year, 12th driest in 30 years. But France obviously made some of the headline news here with the heat wave, and you kind of see that bullseye in France. So similar temperatures last year was really hot in France, and this year was third hottest in 30 years, driest in 3, third driest in 30 years. So again, that bullseye of heat was pretty much centered in northern Spain, France, but you go into northwest Germany, actually northeast Germany, pretty cool, and eastern part of Europe on the seasonable to cooler side. So map on the left here is July temps versus average, and chart on the left there is July temps versus a year ago. Look at the precip real quick here, next chart here. So map on the left here is July precipitation versus average on a world scale, and browns are dry and greens are wet. And the map on the right here is July precip versus last year. Some of the big bullseyes of extremely heavy rainfall was off of Mexico. Obviously in the tropics, there was a report of about 35 inches out there. And then a spot in Southeast Asia there was a spot that had about 50 inches, and a spot off of India that had, again, about 30 plus inches. So kind of typical with that tropical monsoon type activity here. If we jump ahead here to tornadic activity across the U.S. here, it's still picking up a bit. 1,344 tornadoes reported this year. Last year was near historic lows. In fact, at this point last year we were the lowest in 69 years. So it was, again, very inactive season last year. Average is right there in the middle. So, again, an active season in the top 70 percentile at least for the U.S. as a whole. Again, season's going to be, as you can see here, is pretty much the peak has already occurred, and so now it's just a few tornadoes for the balance of the season. If we look out into the tropics here, first off, we want to look at the ocean water temperatures here. We have a central weakening El Nino, and then you actually have a little bit of a La Nina here. We'll animate these maps here real quick, but it's kind of interesting to watch this pulse of colder below normal temperatures coming off of Peru and the equatorial Pacific there. So it's a kind of a weird pattern at this point. You still have remnants of the El Nino, and again, maybe a La Nina trying to form, probably headed for La Nada. This winter, and then we still have that big blob off of Alaska where it's again much above average temperatures, and that just basically allows a ridge in the wintertime, and so unfortunately that means it could be cold in the United States here come this winter. Looking at the tropics again, Hawaii's got a couple threats here. The first one is Eric, probably going to hopefully pass to the south of the Hawaiian Islands, but it could actually become a major hurricane here briefly on Tuesday night, and then probably weaken again as it heads south of the Hawaiian Islands. The thing that usually spares the Hawaiian Islands for tropical activity is just wind shear, so it tends to shear them apart as it gets closer to the Hawaiian Islands. But this is a favorable pattern this year with the kind of a weak central-based El Nino. So again, this is the kind of year where Hawaii can get hit again by a tropical system, and if we don't get hit by this one, there's another one right behind it. So Hawaii's got to watch out here late this week, and then again early next week as well for the system behind Eric. Looking at the Atlantic, Hurricane Center has one little system. They got about 20% chance. There's a lot of headwinds here, Shear to be exact for this system, but in any event, Hurricane Center says about 20% chance. We'd say it's pretty low here for this tropical system to develop. If we look at the Atlantic overall, one major inhibiting factor is just dust coming off Africa. So this animation shows the next week or so. Again, just a lot of dust, again, coming off the Sahara of Africa, and that just inhibits tropical activity. The other major factor here is wind shear. The reds are very, very unfavorable areas for tropical development. As you can see, that encompasses most of the Atlantic. A brief little area of slightly favorable conditions in terms of less wind shear, southeast Florida. That may be the general pattern here this hurricane season, where that Bahamas, southeast Florida is kind of the high threat, close-in area. So again, something could develop quickly in those areas. So that's the area to watch, and that's the area that we've been concerned with all season long. So this is our early preseason outlook again, where we're still saying below average for the season overall, slightly. Weather trends predicting 11. A lot of folks are out there on the high side. We think, again, the wind shear, the dust, is just going to be an inhibiting factor here. So we've had 2 named systems so far this year, a couple weak little disturbances, but again, only 2 systems so far here in 2019. If we look at this week overall, 29 July through 4 August, looking at the coolest in 5 years, again, so this is actually going to expand here. Cool, much below normal temperatures in the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and East Coast is going to, a few more days of warm weather here, but then we're going to see a pretty dramatic cooling trend here as well along the East Coast. Driest in 4 years, 14th wettest in 30 years. So again, kind of a coolish, average type rainfall week. Jumping ahead to next week, getting into the second week here of August, 5 through 11 August. Again, you see the cold kind of expands in the eastern half of the country, and the heat builds out west in California, particularly, where it gets very, very hot. For the nation as a whole, we're going to say the cooler than last year and 6th coolest in 30 years. So this is a pretty cool, dramatic pattern here of cool and wet. We'll see if a cold front can get stalled down in the southeast from Texas into the southeast to create some of this heavier 3, 4, 5 inch rainfall totals for next week. Again, so the wettest in 30 years, but that'll be contingent upon this front stalling out across the southeast. We jump ahead here, we'll look at the world outlook for August overall. So these are trends versus last year. A lot of our clients like to look at trends year over year. For United States overall, we're going to say that August this year is going to be cooler than last year, 11th coolest in 30 years. So it's, again, for our nation as a whole, slightly below average. Not looking for a blistering hot August by any means. We do think the third week of August could probably get pretty warm. But overall, kind of a cooler trend, certainly year over year. And rainfall similar to last year, but third wettest in 30 years for the U.S. Again, so drier in the Midwest, Ohio Valley, probably interior Northeast, and then wetter again from that Texas and the Southeast areas. So with that, folks, we hope you have a great week, and we will be back here this time next week.